Chiku was just a little girl when her world was torn apart. One night, a fierce fire swept through her home, swallowing everything in flames. By the time the villagers arrived, it was too late. Her parents were gone, leaving her all alone in the world. With no one else to turn to, she was taken in by her father's only sister, Aunt Badiri. At first, Chiku thought she had found safety, but she quickly realized that Badiri was nothing like her mother. Instead of love and comfort, she was met with harsh words and endless chores. From dawn till dusk, she scrubbed floors, fetched water, and cooked meals, while Badiri and her daughter Jihana lived in comfort. Jihana, spoiled and selfish, saw Chiku as nothing more than a servant. She would laugh as she spilled food on the floor, just to make Chiku clean it up, or tear Chiku's only dress, knowing she had no other clothes to wear. No matter how hard Chiku worked, nothing was ever enough. If she finished her chores too slowly, Badiri would scold her. If she did them too quickly, she was accused of being lazy. Some nights, she went to bed hungry, listening to the sounds of Jihana feasting on the best food. Yet, despite everything, Chiku remained kind and patient, holding on to the hope that one day things would change. But she had no idea that Badiri had something far worse planned for her. As the years passed, Badiri's hatred for Chiku only grew. No matter how much she mistreated the girl, Chiku never complained. She endured the endless chores, the harsh words, and Jihana's cruel tricks without shedding a tear. This only made Badiri angrier. She wanted Chiku to break, to beg, to disappear. But Chiku remained strong, and that made Badiri despise her even more. There was another reason for Badiri's growing hatred. Chiku's father had left behind a small piece of land, rich with fertile soil and tall palm trees. By law, that land would one day belong to Chiku. Badiri had always believed it should be her, but as long as Chiku was alive, she could never claim it. Fear crept into her heart. What if the elders decided Chiku was old enough to inherit it? What if someone in the village took pity on her and helped her reclaim her father's property? Badiri knew she had to act fast. She couldn't simply chase Chiku away. People would ask questions. No, she needed to make sure no one ever looked for her again. And so, a wicked idea took root in her mind. She began whispering to the villagers, telling them that strange things happened when Chiku was around. "Have you noticed how the wind howls when she cries?" she murmured. "And wasn't she the only one who survived that fire? Perhaps she is cursed." At first, the villagers laughed. Chiku was just a girl, quiet and hard-working. But Badiri was clever. She planted doubt like seeds in the soil, watering them with fear. If a pot broke, she would shake her head and sigh. Chiku was in the kitchen just moments ago. If someone fell ill, she would whisper, "I saw Chiku looking at them strangely the other day." Slowly, the villagers started to look at Chiku differently. Children who once played with her now avoided her. Mothers pulled their babies close when she passed by. Even the market women, who had once given her scraps of food, now refused to meet her eyes. Chiku felt the change, but didn't understand why. The world had always been unkind to her, but now it felt even colder. Even when she finished all her chores, Badiri's eyes still burned with hatred. Then, one evening, Badiri called her inside. "Chiku," she said, her voice strangely sweet. "I have been thinking about you." Chiku looked up in surprise. Badiri had never spoken to her this kindly before. "You are not like other children," Badiri continued. "You have something special inside you. The village doesn't understand it, but I do, and I know how you can find your true destiny." Chiku frowned. "My destiny?" Badiri nodded. "Yes, you must go into the jungle." Chiku felt a chill crawl up her spine. "The jungle?" "Yes, my child." Badiri's voice was smooth, her smile gentle. "Great spirits live there. If you go, they will reveal who you truly are. They will give you the life you deserve." Chiku's heart pounded. The jungle was dangerous. People only entered it to hunt, and even then, they never went alone. Wild animals lurked in the shadows, and many who entered never returned. But what if I get lost?" Chiku asked hesitantly. Badiri took her hands and squeezed them. "You won't. The spirits will guide you." Jihana, who had been silent until now, smirked. "Yes, Chiku, it's the only way for you to find out who you really are." Chiku looked between them, unsure. Badiri had never cared about her before. Why would she want to help her now? But as she stared into Badiri's eyes, she saw something cold and dark behind that smile. A feeling of unease settled in her chest. But what choice did she have? She had no family, no friends, and nowhere else to go. Maybe, just maybe, Badiri was telling the truth. Taking a deep breath, Chiku nodded. "Okay, I will go." Badiri's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. The trap had been set, and Chiku had just walked into it. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Badiri shook Chiku awake. "It is time," she said, her voice firm but strangely calm. Chiku rubbed her eyes and sat up, confusion and fear swirling inside her. "Time for what?" she asked hesitantly. "To find your destiny," Badiri replied, her lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We must leave before the village wakes." Jihana stood behind her mother, barely able to hide her excitement. She was dressed in her finest clothes, gold bangles jingling on her wrists, as if this was some grand festival instead of a journey into the unknown. Chiku swallowed hard, but nodded. She had no choice. If this was the only way to prove she wasn't cursed, then she would do it. They walked for hours, the village disappearing behind them as they entered the jungle. The deeper they went, the darker it became. The tall trees blocked out the sun, their branches twisting like giant hands reaching for the sky. The air smelled damp, thick with the scent of earth and rotting leaves. Strange noises echoed around them, birds calling, insects humming, and the distant sound of something moving through the underbrush. Chiku's heart pounded, but she didn't complain. She didn't ask to turn back. She only followed, one step at a time, deeper into the unknown. Finally, they reached a narrow clearing near a deep ravine. The drop was steep, the rocks jagged and sharp. A wrong step could mean death. Chiku shivered as a gust of wind rushed through the trees, making the branches sway and creak like whispers in the dark. "This is the place," Badiri said, stopping abruptly. Chiku looked around, confused. "But what do I do now?" Badiri's smile was slow and cruel. "You wait. The spirits will come to you." Jihana giggled, covering her mouth as if trying to hide her amusement. Before Chiku could say another word, Badiri turned on her heel. "Come, Jihana," she said. Chiku's breath caught in her throat. "Wait, where are you going?" "Back home," Badiri said simply. Panic seized Chiku. But you said—" "I said the spirits will guide you," Badiri interrupted coldly. "And they will. If you are truly meant to survive, they will show you the way." Chiku lunged forward, grabbing Badiri's arm, but the woman shoved her back with surprising force. "Stay here, Chiku," she said in a voice as cold as the wind. "It is your destiny." And then, without another word, Badiri and Jihana turned and walked away, their laughter fading into the distance. Chiku stood frozen, her body trembling. The jungle felt bigger now, darker. The silence pressed in around her, thick and heavy. Then, from somewhere in the shadows, a low growl rumbled through the air. Chiku spun around, her eyes wide with terror. Something was watching her, something hungry. Chiku stood frozen, her breath shallow as the eerie growls surrounded her. The rustling in the bushes grew louder, and then, eyes, glowing yellow eyes peered at her from the darkness. One pair, two pairs, three, more. The hyenas crept closer, their mouths slightly open, revealing sharp teeth. Chiku's heart pounded wildly. She stepped back, her foot slipping slightly on the damp earth. The hyenas cackled, their laughter cruel and hungry. They could smell her fear. They knew she was weak, alone, and defenseless. One of them lunged. Chiku screamed, covering her face, expecting sharp teeth to sink into her flesh. But then, a deafening roar shattered the night. The ground trembled beneath her feet. A powerful wind rushed past her as something enormous leaped between her and the hyenas. Chiku dared to look up. A massive lion stood before her, its golden mane glowing in the moonlight, its muscles tensed, its tail swayed low, and its deep amber eyes locked onto the hyenas. The hyenas hesitated, their laughter turning into uncertain whimpers. They weren't dealing with an easy meal anymore. The lion growled, low and threatening. One step forward, then another. The hyenas backed away. The leader let out a reluctant snarl before turning and disappearing into the trees. The others followed, vanishing as quickly as they had appeared. Silence fell. Chiku was still shaking, staring at the lion in disbelief. It turned to her, its golden eyes unreadable. And then, darkness. When Chiku opened her eyes again, she was no longer in the jungle. She was lying on soft earth inside a cave, warm and safe. The air smelled of damp stone and something musky yet familiar. She blinked, sitting up slowly. Her eyes widened. She wasn't alone. The lion was there, lying near the entrance of the cave, watching her. But it wasn't just the lion. A massive elephant stood further back, its ears slowly flapping. A sleek leopard rested on a rock, its tail curled around its paws. In the shadows, she could see smaller creatures, monkeys, birds, even a pair of curious-looking jackals. Chiku swallowed hard, her mind racing. Why hadn't they killed her? Why was she still alive? The lion, her savior, let out a soft rumbling sound, almost like a purr. Chiku had never been this close to a lion before. It should have terrified her, but somehow it didn't. She looked around again, realization dawning. These creatures hadn't harmed her. They had saved her, and they weren't keeping her prisoner. They were protecting her. Chiku woke up every morning to the sounds of the jungle, the rustling of leaves, the distant calls of birds, and the deep breathing of the great lion, Roho, who always kept watch at the cave entrance. She was still amazed that the animals had not only spared her life, but had accepted her as one of their own. At first, she was frightened. She did not understand their ways, their rules, or why they had saved her. But soon, she realized that the jungle was not just a place of danger. It was alive, filled with wisdom and silent lessons waiting to be learned. It was Makula, the old leopard with golden eyes, who taught her how to move silently. "Watch the ground," Makula seemed to say as he padded across the leaves without making a sound. Chiku tried to copy him, stepping lightly, careful not to snap a twig or disturb the earth. She fell many times, but Makula never scolded her. He only watched with patient eyes, waiting for her to learn. Then there was Tembo, the ancient elephant, who had seen many seasons come and go. His wrinkled skin held stories of the past, and his deep, wise eyes seemed to look into her soul. He showed her where to find fresh water and which plants could heal wounds. When she was hungry, he led her to trees where sweet fruit hung low. When she was sad, he wrapped his great trunk around her in comfort. As days turned into weeks, Chiku became stronger. She no longer feared the jungle. She learned to climb trees as swiftly as the monkeys, using her hands and feet to grip the rough bark. She learned which berries were safe to eat and which ones would make her sick. She learned how to listen, not just to the sounds of the jungle, but to the silence that came before danger. One evening, Roho, the great lion, took her to a clearing where the wind whispered through the trees. He let out a deep growl, low and steady. At first, Chiku didn't understand, but then she heard the answer, a growl from a lion far away. It was their way of speaking, their way of warning or calling for help. Chiku's heart swelled with wonder. The jungle had a language of its own, not spoken in words, but in movements, in sounds, in the way the earth trembled under the weight of an elephant's step, or the way birds flew away before a storm. She was no longer just a lost girl. She was becoming part of the wild. Chiku had always believed that the fire that took her parents' lives was a cruel twist of fate, a tragedy written by the gods. But deep inside, something never felt right. The memories of that night were blurred by smoke and fear, yet she could still hear her mother's desperate screams and her father's strong voice shouting her name. The fire had come too suddenly, too fiercely, as if someone had planned it. One evening, as she sat by a small river, staring at her reflection in the water, a strange feeling washed over her. The jungle grew eerily silent. The wind stopped rustling the trees. Even the crickets, which usually sang through the night, held their breath. Then, the water before her started to ripple, though nothing had touched it. The ripples expanded, and suddenly, images began to appear. She saw flames, thick and hungry, devouring her childhood home. She saw the shadowy figure of a woman standing in the distance, watching the fire spread. Then, the woman turned, and Chiku gasped. It was Badiri, her aunt, the one who had raised her, who had fed her scraps like a stray dog, who had sent her into the jungle to die. Chiku's hands trembled as she pulled away from the water, gasping for breath. The vision vanished, but the truth had been revealed. Her parents had not died by accident. Badiri had set the fire. She had murdered them to steal their land, their wealth, and everything they had built. Before she could even process what she had seen, a deep voice called from behind. The truth was always there, waiting for you to see it. Chiku spun around to find an old man standing among the trees. His skin was dark like the earth, his white beard flowing like the river's foam. His eyes held centuries of wisdom. He was Baba Nyango, the hidden elder of the jungle, a man known only in whispered stories. "How do you know this?" Chiku asked, her voice shaky with anger and grief. "I have watched from the shadows," Baba Nyango said. "I saw the flames that night. I saw the greed in Badiri's eyes. She thought no one was watching, but the jungle sees all. The trees remember. The wind carries whispers of the past." Chiku clenched her fists. The jungle had saved her life, had taught her how to survive, had given her strength, and now it had given her truth. She could no longer be the helpless girl abandoned to die. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a warrior now, trained by the wild, strengthened by nature. She would not let her parents' murder go unpunished. It was time for justice. The sun was setting behind the hills as the villagers of Nabuta prepared to end their day. Women carried baskets of yams and millet, children played near the river, and men gathered by the central fire to share stories. It was a peaceful evening, until a strange sound echoed through the village. A deep, powerful roar. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. The ground seemed to tremble as footsteps approached from the jungle. The villagers watched in disbelief as a figure emerged from the trees. A young woman, strong and tall, wrapped in warrior skins, her dark hair flowing wildly around her shoulders. A lion walked beside her, its golden eyes glowing like fire. Behind them, a group of animals followed. A massive elephant, a sleek leopard, and fierce-looking wild dogs. Gasps filled the air. "Chiku!" someone whispered in shock. The girl who had been sent to die was alive. Not just alive, she was transformed. Chiku stepped forward, her gaze scanning the familiar faces. Some were kind, some were cruel, but all of them had believed the lie, that she was gone forever. She was no longer the weak, helpless girl who had been dragged into the jungle. She was a warrior now, the queen of the wild, the jungle's own daughter. She stopped in front of Badiri, who had turned pale at the sight of her. Jihana clutched her mother's arm, her eyes darting between Chiku and the lion beside her. The villagers murmured in confusion, waiting for someone to speak. Chiku's voice was steady, but it carried thunderous power. "Did you think I would never return?" Badiri forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow. "Child, you must be mistaken. We searched for you for days. We mourned for you." Chiku took another step forward. Roho, the lion, let out a low growl that made the villagers step back in fear. "You mourned for me?" Chiku's voice dripped with anger. "You abandoned me in the jungle to die!" Gasps filled the air. The villagers turned to Badiri, their eyes filled with suspicion. Badiri raised her hands. "Lies! This girl is speaking nonsense." Chiku's heart pounded, but she had come prepared. She turned to the crowd and called out, "Baba Nyango, come forward!" The villagers gasped again as the old jungle elder stepped out from the shadows. His presence alone was enough to silence the crowd. Baba Nyango raised his hand, his voice deep and strong. "The truth is not so easily hidden, Badiri." He turned to the crowd. "This woman murdered her own brother. She set fire to his house to steal his land, and when Chiku survived, she took her to the jungle to let the wild finish her." A shocked silence followed his words. Then whispers turned into shouts. People backed away from Badiri, as if she carried a deadly curse. Jihana trembled, clinging to her mother, but Badiri had lost the power she once held. Chiku took a deep breath. This was justice, but it was only the beginning. She had returned not just to expose her aunt, but to reclaim what was hers. She was no longer the forgotten orphan. She was the jungle princess, and she had come home. The village square fell into a heavy silence as Baba Nyango stepped forward, holding a bundle of old, worn letters in his hands. His deep, commanding voice echoed through the air. "The truth can be hidden for years, but it will always find its way to the light." He unrolled one of the letters and held it up for all to see. "This was written by Chiku's father," Baba Nyango continued. "In it, he speaks of his love for his daughter and his plans to leave his land in her name. He feared his sister, Badiri, would try to take it from her, and that is exactly what she did." The villagers muttered in shock. Some shook their heads in disbelief, while others looked at Badiri with disgust. Chiku stepped forward, her eyes burning with pain and fury. "She killed my parents. She burned down my home, and when that wasn't enough, she threw me to the jungle hoping I would never return." A few elders, who had once supported Badiri, looked away in shame. They had believed her lies. They had allowed her to rule with deceit, but now the truth was too clear to ignore. "Lies!" Badiri suddenly shrieked, her face twisting with desperation. "This is all a trick. This girl was supposed to be dead. She's using dark magic to turn you against me." But no one believed her. The weight of her crimes pressed down on her like a curse, and she could feel the village slipping away from her grasp. Jihana, who had always walked with arrogance, now trembled beside her mother. "Mama, what do we do?" she whispered, her voice shaking. Badiri grabbed Jihana's arm and tried to run, pushing through the crowd, desperate to escape. But before they could reach the edge of the village, a deep, thunderous growl filled the air. Roho the lion stepped forward, his golden eyes burning with fury. He let out a powerful roar, sending chills through everyone's spine. The villagers backed away, giving the great beast space. Badiri and Jihana froze in terror. Chiku walked beside Roho, her presence just as powerful. "You left me to die in the jungle," she said coldly. "Now, the jungle has come for you." The elder council gathered, their faces grim. One of the elders raised his staff. "Badiri and Jihana, for your crimes of murder, lies and betrayal, you are hereby banished from this village." A collective gasp filled the air. Jihana fell to her knees, begging for mercy, but no one listened. Badiri fought, screamed, cursed the village, but it was no use. The people who once feared her now turned their backs on her. As they were forced out, the jungle awaited them. The same jungle where they had left Chiku to die. But this time, there would be no beasts to save them. As the dust settled and the village returned to peace, Chiku stood tall in the very place where her parents once lived. The land that had been stolen from her, the home that had been burned down in greed, now belonged to her once more. But she did not let anger or revenge guide her heart. She had already won by surviving, by returning stronger, and by exposing the truth. Instead of punishing those who had once turned their backs on her, Chiku chose a different path. She rebuilt her father's home, not just for herself, but for those who had nowhere else to go. Word spread quickly, and soon, orphans, abandoned children, and those cast away by society began to arrive. Chiku welcomed them all, offering food, shelter, and the love she had once been denied. The village watched in awe. Many had expected her to become cruel, to seek vengeance for the pain she had endured, but instead, she proved to be a leader of kindness, just like her father before her. Even those who had once whispered against her now came forward, offering their support, ashamed of how easily they had been fooled by Badiri's lies. Deep within the jungle, the animals watched over her still. Roho, the great lion, would sometimes appear at the edge of the village, his golden eyes gleaming in the moonlight, as if reminding her that she would never be alone. Makula, the wise leopard, would leave fresh meat near her home when food was scarce, a silent gift from the wild. Tembo, the mighty elephant, was seen more than once carrying logs toward her land, as if helping her build the sanctuary. It was clear the jungle had not forgotten her. One evening, as Chiku stood by her newly built home, a gentle breeze rustled through the trees. The leaves whispered, the ground felt warm, and for a brief moment, she swore she could hear her parents' voices in the wind. "You have made us proud, my daughter." Tears filled her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of peace. She had not only reclaimed what was rightfully hers, but she had honored her parents' legacy in the most beautiful way. And so, Chiku became more than just a girl who had survived the jungle. She became a legend, a protector, a bridge between two worlds, the village and the wild. The people spoke of her for generations, telling the story of the girl who had been thrown away, but rose again, stronger than anyone could have imagined. And in the depths of the jungle, the beasts still watched, forever guarding the one who had become their own. The story of Chiku became more than just a tale. It became a legend. In every corner of the village, from the elders who sat beneath the great baobab tree to the children who played by the river, her name was spoken with awe and wonder. She was no longer just the orphaned girl who had been abandoned in the jungle. She was the girl who had lived among the beasts and returned stronger than ever. Fathers told their sons about her bravery, how she faced the darkness of the jungle with nothing but her will to survive. Mothers whispered her name to their daughters, reminding them that strength is not found in power, but in resilience and kindness. The young ones, with wide eyes and eager hearts, imagined the mighty Roho the lion walking beside her, protecting her as if she were part of his own pride. They dreamed of the wise Makula, the old leopard who had taught her the secrets of the wild, and Tembo, the gentle giant who had guided her steps. As time passed, the legend of Chiku spread beyond her village, reaching distant lands where her name became a symbol of courage. Travelers carried the tale across rivers and mountains, telling of the girl who had been cast away but rose again, stronger than those who had tried to break her. Some believed she had been blessed by the spirits of the jungle. Others said she could still speak the language of the beasts, that when she stood beneath the trees, the animals would listen, understanding her heart as she understood theirs. Many years later, when Chiku had grown older and her hair had turned silver like moonlight. People still came to see her. They sought her wisdom, her guidance, and the strength that had made her a legend. She never turned them away. She welcomed the lost, the broken, the ones who had nowhere else to go. And deep in the jungle, her old friends never forgot her. Even when she no longer walked the paths of the wild, the animals still watched over her. On quiet nights, the villagers swore they could hear the distant roar of a lion, a sound that echoed like a promise, a reminder that Chiku would never be forgotten. For generations to come, parents told their children her story, not just as a tale, but as a lesson. Cruelty may try to destroy the innocent, but it can never defeat the spirit of the brave.